Segment 4. This is a brand new segment, and a segment I'm very excited about because it's a segment that we'd like to. I think we're going to try to bring it into each of our subsequent podcasts, and it's also a bit of a tribute, if you will. So why don't you?
Oh, you're calling it audible.
I'm calling it. Yeah, I'm changing it up.
Whoa.
You see, Mike and I, we come up with the segments, right, and ideas, and we try to leave a couple open. And before we start the podcast, we kind of talk through the various segments and get some alignment. And we'll also, we'll throw out some ideas, right? We'll spitball and say, hey, maybe we could try this or try that. And sometimes it's, let's do it in here, and we'll literally write it. Here's a new segment. And other times, as you mentioned earlier today, it was, I have an idea. I have an idea for a segment. And it's not necessarily for today, but, something we could try later. But you know what? That's the advantage of live TV, baby, is that I'm going to go right here, right now, segment 4, whatever we have, out the window. We're going to go with Mike's idea. Right. So, give it to us, Mike.
I present to you the questions.
The questions! Not to be confused with trivia.
Presented by...
The questions?
James McGee. The James McGee Memorial Questions segment.
So I think, at least for the first time...
Thus has been knighted.
I think for the first time, we should probably briefly share why the James McGee honorable questions. Well, first of all, who is James McGee?
James is always coming up with what ifs, what if scenarios, a lot of red dawns.
Yeah, so every car trip, every time we're camping trip, whenever there's a lull, kind of in what's going on, he immediately jumps in and he literally
pulls his phone out,
keeps a list, and says, "All right, guys, what if Russians invaded Wisconsin today?"
Right.
And we each go through a scenario. Or what if you had to build your ultimate crime fighting team using only characters from 1980s sitcoms? They're out there, and they're random. They're really random. So I love the idea so much when you mention it. I have decided to scrap the regular scheduled segment 4 and instead go right to off the cuff.
Yeah.
The James McGee presents
the
questions. And this is our first one, man. This is our first one. We're only going to do, by the way, this is not trivia. This is just, it's kind of like opening up a debate. And you and I are going to discuss and debate. So each time we do this, we'll have just one unbelievable question. And I'm going to give one example. It's not the one we're going to discuss today. Podcast is not long enough for this. But the one that has created the most heated, lengthy debates is transporter, like in Star Trek, are transporters actually transporting or duplicating?
Is it cloning? Do you actually die and are reborn?
Is it still really you? Or is it not really you? We're not going to do that. It wouldn't be fair.
James's favorite question.
James, whenever he's getting bored with the other questions, he immediately goes to that one and tries to get everybody all worked up. That's not today's question, but that just gives you a flavor of what we're talking about. Mike, you chose today's question on behalf of Mr. McGee. By the way, it should be noted that our other intent here is to see James. We haven't seen James in about a year. Right, since COVID lockdown, and hopefully soon we'll have an opportunity to see him again. We've talked a little bit and texted, but the idea that we'd love to do, we didn't plan for it today, but in the future would be to see if we can get
shame him into participating.
Get Mr. McGee himself to call in and give us the question. So in honor of that, we're going to do our own question this week. Mike, why don't you share the question?
Which do you think is stronger, adamantium or mithril? So, of course, adamantium, you have Wolverine's schnick schnick. And mithril is mined by the dwarves in Lord of the Rings. Bilbo's famous
Mines of Moria. A mine.
Gold in a mine.
Wow. Well, all right. So I have a thought on this.
Okay.
I have a thought on this. It's going to lead into maybe which one is stronger, but let's think about this. So, mithril is mined and can be fashioned.
Yes.
Because we've seen that it can be fashioned into very intricate, fine weaved armor, which is what we see on Frodo and Bilbo, by dwarves. Yes. As opposed to adamantium, which has to literally be heated to like whatever, melted.
Boiling point.
And then, in the case of Wolverine, as it's in liquid form, boiling liquid form, grafted to things, right? So it's almost like dealing with real steel. You got to heat it, you got to mold it, etc. I don't have a good example of adamantium ever being turned into something you would wear under your shirt. You maybe as a plate of armor, but not fine craft. And in that respect, I'm going to go with mithril.
Mithril, yeah.
Because and I got to go based on what the description is and what we see. We see these very small links, thousands of them woven as into a flexible piece of armor. That massive, I think it's a cave troll, jabs him full force with a spear, and it doesn't penetrate. So the idea that tiny, thin amount of material...
The sheer force alone should have crushed him. Just like a pancake.
Yeah.
So obviously it hits it, and then it disperses the momentum and the impact.
Well, it's I mean,
at some point.
It's like fabric, right? You might not, now granted this is just cotton, but I'm saying you might be able to put pressure on this and not break the material, but you're still causing pressure and damage underneath, which is why even Kevlar and other things, when it hits, it doesn't penetrate, but there's bruising and other things.
There's still the physics of it.
There's the dispersion of the power, the momentum, the kinetic energy.
It's like...
So the material...
It's like vibranium.
Well, and the fundamental difference with vibranium is vibranium, by its nature, is it absorbs the impact, the kinetic energy. Right? Which is why when you see him throw, for example, in Endgame, he throws Thor's hammer, as he throws the shield and then throws Thor's hammer. When they hit, the shield doesn't... normally, if it was anything else, the hammer would hit the shield and that kinetic energy would transfer. Instead, the shield stays perfectly in place and the hammer bounces back. Right. Because vibranium absorbs all of that kinetic energy. But that's not mithril, at least not from anything that's been described. And it's not adamantium. So if we're talking pure strength of just the material, I'm going to have to give it some mithril because of how finely woven, small it can get, yet still retain its ability to hold its shape and survive an immense penetrating force. That's my opinion. That's so.
I concur.
You could. Wow, that's awesome.
Well,
now you know that if James were here, he would almost automatically.
Yes, he'd be contrarian.
He would be contrarian. He would. For him, it's not what's the right answer; it's the debate. We need to debate this. Juice. We need to keep debating this. And other than well, at least me, I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge. I'm going based on some of the comics and, of course, the films. James generally has, when he has a question, it's because he's coming in with an encyclopedic level of knowledge. So he would be throwing something weird about vibranium or adamantium that was only mentioned in one comic in 1972 that says it actually has qualities of blah, 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 blah. And, it's hard to debate that. But I think if we go based on the common understanding of these two materials as they've been presented in cinema, mithril, hands down. But it does immediately call into question that if it is a flexible material and somebody hits you with enough force, that force, it's actually the best example, or a great example, I think, is Bishop at the end of Aliens. He gets speared right, by the alien queen's tail. And what happens is the shirt ends up stretching before it too eventually. So it's that whole idea of the energy. Yes, it might not have split the shirt until it reached a certain point, but it's not like he hadn't been impaled.
Right.
And you could argue, well, if it didn't split the shirt, it shouldn't have impaled him. Of course not. That's not. There's flexibility and elasticity and other factors that come into play. But the force of that blow, when they show him getting hit, Frodo getting hit with the spear, literally should have just crushed his body in half.
Right.
It should have been mithril to mithril with no Frodo left in the middle, like squeezing a tube of toothpaste. But it's fantasy, baby. It's fantasy, baby, and we love it. We absolutely love it. So there you go with the segment 4, Random James McGee
Presents the questions.
The questions.